in middle school, a specific example of something that I have personally done is popcorn reading. And
What's that?
so popcorn reading is when you randomly go around the room and you like popping popcorn and you say, Mason, it's your turn to read, and you have to read aloud to the class. And then you pick on the next kid and you say, okay, it's your turn to read. And sometimes as teachers, we would do it as a way of like, this kid's not paying attention and I know he's not paying attention, so I'm gonna call on him. But exactly what you said earlier of like that reduced fluency of the line by line reading, that the comprehension for the entire class is now at risk because it's so laborious that now none of us understand what you just read.
So it's almost like, let me know if I'm wrong, so because I picked on a student who may be struggling with reading, in effect, I could actually be hurting the whole room because nobody's getting better at this point.
And when I think about students too, our students in middle school, they have this awareness and they have for a long time. In elementary, the kids, they go to the intervention room and sometimes they think it's kind of fun, right? Like, especially early elementary, they're like, I get to go with this fun teacher that I really like. Of course, that's a generalization. That's not the experience of every student. But in middle school in particular, we're coming up against motivation and engagement. And then on top of that, they have this societal awareness of now my classmates know that I'm not a good reader, or I don't want them to know that I'm a good reader. And if you think about it, they're faced with that every single day and every single class. It's not just the ELA class. A lot of times when I would have outbursts of kids, it's because my class was at the end of the day and they knew without a shadow of a doubt that we were going to read or write. And they've been doing that all day long. And think about how exhausting that would be if all day long you have this difficulty that you're trying to hide from everybody, sometimes including your teacher. And then you get to the end of the day and there's this one specific class where you're going to have to do it. 1,000% for some of our kids, especially some of our boys, it's way easier for me to flip a desk and cuss my teacher out and be able to leave and leave that environment than it is to sit in that class and be made fun of because I can't do this thing that's so difficult for me.
All right, everybody, this is Matthew Mason. I am the host of the Hot Conversations with School Leaders podcast. Again, I say this all the time. I'm always going to do my best to bring you guys content and individuals who I think are just going to help you as school leaders. Today is no different. Literally right before I got on here, I was telling this young lady, because we worked together. I was a principal. She's an English teacher in my school. Probably one of the worst days. I'm going to make it seem really bad because she's on one of the worst days as an educator was when she let me know she was moving on, and she's been doing incredible things since she left. She is an incredible English teacher. Kids loved her. She went by SJ, and so that's what everybody called her at the school. She has been a division leader. She has been a reading coach, reading specialist. And right now she is doing some work in Virginia with the Virginia Literacy program, right? And that's made that right.
Virginia, yeah.
Yes. And so she's doing great work there. So as you can see, she's gone from working with kids to now working with kids and adults to now doing work with the whole state. So her reach and her impact is very, very big. So with us today, we have Mrs. Danielle Sisson-Jones. How you doing, SJ?
Good. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for all these. Remember, everybody, this is Hot Conversation. So we're going to be honest, open, and transparent. The good thing is that I think today, something that as a leader, I have struggled with, because I was not an English teacher. I did not go to school for reading and writing, but I love to read and I love to write. Like, that is something that I do on a regular basis. So, Esther, can you give us a little bit about your leadership journey, how you got here, and why you're even here?
Yes. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. So, obviously, like you said, I was a secondary English major. I went to Longwood University, as many of us do. Love Longwood. Big fan. Went there for many different degrees. So I started off my career as an English secondary ed major, and I wanted nothing else than to be a classroom teacher. Like you said, I absolutely love the kids. I connected well with them. And I immediately, once getting into the classroom, realized I was a seventh grade teacher at Longwood in my practicum. And I immediately realized none of the kids knew how to read. And I had no idea what to do about it. Longwood is a great teaching school. If you're familiar with Virginia colleges, and they're well known for their teaching program, but I felt like that I knew so much about how to teach writing and so much about how to teach kids that came to me already knowing how to read. But when it came to kids that were really having difficulty, I had no idea what to do. So in my senior year, I enrolled in a master's degree program at Longwood. So I didn't even finish yet. I enrolled in a reading specialist program, got my master's. And the only reason I was doing that is because I wanted to help the kids that I was seeing in my classroom. Again, I never wanted to do any of these things.
Right. I'm going to cut you off real quick. For everybody to know, this is going to be kind of the MO for SJ. Like, SJ is literally, she's going to jump in, and she's going to be like, she's incredibly ambitious, and it's really good. Like, she will jump into something and be like, and kill it in that, and be like, ooh, this is going to help people. Boom. And she's going to jump in that, she's going to kill it in that, and like, she's just going to keep on moving. And I think that's something great about her. So you're going to hear that theme throughout a lot of stuff. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm like a 100% in or 100% out. Like, I'm kind of an extremist. So I signed up for that master's degree program. And of course, my family was like, this is great, because in today's society, like, the master's degree is the new bachelor's degree. So about halfway through that program, I was teaching full time, and I was also doing the 2-year master's degree program half-time. Wonderful program. Immediately going in, everybody that was in the program with me were all elementary majors. So they knew a lot they had a lot of prior knowledge about how to teach reading, the foundations of reading. And I was sitting there like, I have absolutely no idea what you guys are talking about. And I would always be the one to raise my hand and be like, so what does this mean for middle school students? And really, like, even my professors couldn't talk a ton. We had one professor in the program, I think, that had middle school experience. And about towards the end of the program, I said, we know about diagnosing students for reading difficulties. We know that we can give all of these batteries of assessments in order to figure out what the real difficulty, what the root cause is for students. Why don't we do this in middle school? Like, my middle school kids are coming to me, I don't even know how they're reading. I don't know anything about their reading ability. I barely sometimes know if they passed the SOL or not. And so she said, I don't know. Why don't you research it? So what did I do? As you said, I signed up to get my doctorate degree in my last semester. And I actually am crazy enough that I did that one full time while teaching full time. That was when I was with you. So I was a full time teacher in Lynchburg City at Sandusky Middle School, and I was taking my doctorate full time. And what was really cool with the fact that I did all of these degrees kind of back to back while teaching is I was able to take everything that I was learning and really apply that theory into the classroom. And since I kind of already knew going into my doctorate what I wanted to study, every single paper that I was writing, all of the research I was doing was all focused around diagnostic assessments and how can that help support middle school students. And, when I was at Sandusky with you, one of the things I did was I took kids who were some of our most behaviorally challenged students. And I noticed that there was a huge correlation with that negative behavior in other classrooms and their inability to read. And so I started taking them and I started kind of doing my own little studies where I would give them a diagnostic assessment in decoding and realize that, wow, they're basically a first grade decoder. And then I would start giving them some support outside of the classroom. I would do after school tutoring and work with them. And I really started to notice that their behavior was getting better, not only in my class, but in other people's classes, because all of a sudden they were like, wow, I can do this. I'm successful for once in this thing that has a barrier for me. So I finished that degree, went back, got my admin degree. And within there, after, I left Sandusky, I became a reading specialist in Richmond City, then moved to the division level in Colonial Heights, where I was in charge of their entire literacy program, 4th through 12th grade. That was an absolute joy because it was a smaller division. So I got to still see kids. I got to work with kids, really be hands-on, but then also got a lot of that division level experience where you're being able to see how are we allocating our resources. I got to work with Title I budgets, did a Title I audit. That was like so much fun. And then prior to coming to VLP, I worked in Petersburg as director of elementary Title I and principal director. And then after leaving there, I now work for currently UVA in the Virginia Literacy Partnerships Office, and we are working on the implementation of the Virginia Literacy Act. So I partner with 16 different school divisions across the state, kind of helping them do all of the things that I have seen work for middle schools. And I specifically work with 4th through 8th grade.
Hey, everybody, this is Matthew Mason. I am the host of the Hot School Leaders Podcast. Look, I just wanted to take a second to tell you thank you. Yep, just want to tell you thank you for showing up every Thursday for our guest, for some time just to be honest, open, and transparent. The goal of this podcast, the goal of this YouTube channel is to inspire, to encourage, and to challenge you in your leadership journey. And as we are growing as school leaders, making sure we're better and showing up every day for all of the stakeholders who are in our schools. Look, I just want to take a couple seconds to ask you to do a couple of things. First off, I need you to share. Then I need you to follow. I need you to like. I need you to comment. I need you to subscribe. I need you to do all of those things because when you do that, it's going to keep pushing us out there. We're going to get more resources and hopefully make this thing better for you every week. So again, if you can subscribe to the channel, make sure you follow the podcast. We're on Apple and we're on Spotify. Make sure you comment because when you comment, it lets us know how we can get better. Make sure you do all of the things that I shared earlier. So again, we're hot leaders. We're honest, open, and transparent. Again, I tell you, thank you. Let's get to the episode. All right, so we're back. So I want to find out a little bit more about just what makes you, in some ways, tick a little bit, right? Because you are very, like, again, as things, you see things that need to happen, and you see changes that need to happen. You're going to jump right in and you're going to try to fix it. Which again is another great thing about you. You're a very solution-minded individual. Like, let's figure out how we can do this and make things better. So where does that come from with you?
I think part of it is when I got into education, previous to that, didn't know growing up that I wanted to be a teacher. I'm not one of those people that's like a long line of teachers and like they have it in their blood. And I was actually horrible at school. Like I was
Oh wow.
so bad at school when I was in middle school and high school. It was a struggle. And
So bad
so
academically or bad like behaviorally?
academically,
Oh,
behaviorally,
okay.
I was always how I am, Mason, where
Gotcha. I was like, okay, all right.
people please are always like, but yeah, academically, it was not good. If I was not interested in something, and still to this day, if I'm not interested in something, like I cannot pay attention. But
Yeah.
it's something about when I like get the attachment to that idea, like you're saying, like I have to get to the bottom of it. And I don't know if we're born with that or it's something that we
Mhm.
develop, but somewhere along the line, I got into those education classes and I was like, oh, I really care about this. When I was in high school, I also was teaching swim lessons. I'm an only child. So that was my
Okay.
first, like diving into teaching. And I was doing like a gradual release before I knew what that was.
Gotcha.
With teaching some lessons. So I immediately was like, oh, I actually really like kids and I actually really like making this make sense for them and kind of seeing their little faces, even in swim lessons, just light up when they finally got something. And that really took me into my work with students. And so I really do just think that because I care so much and like I was always super bad at math, like it was something
Okay.
that really was a struggle for me. But when I started looking at student data, and even a couple weeks ago, I was like, with vowels assessments that we're doing across the state, like now it's just like it makes sense because I think there's a kid behind every single number.
Yeah.
Um, and so I attribute it to just caring so much about fixing issues for our kids. Like I want to remove those barriers that then I'll do anything that it
Yeah.
takes to the answer that's going to help support them. And sometimes we don't as leaders get the right answer the first time. And I by no means think that or know that any time that I've come up with ideas that it means that it was the best idea or sometimes it didn't work. Sometimes it fell flat and I had to restart, especially when you start adding in adults into the mix and having to try and move adults forward. But I just try again, and I like just keep following that thread of like looking at the data and then saying, okay, what do I know about these students that are sitting in front of me? And I just keep trying things, because if we just keep doing the same things we've always done, we know that's not going to work.
So with the work that you've done, again, I think you're just dropping a lot of gems. I think I got out of that like just not quitting, right? Like it like just keep trying. Like something's at some point going to stick, and obviously you're using data to do that. You're using your research to do that. But if this doesn't work, it doesn't mean something's wrong with the kid,
Yes.
right? It just maybe I just haven't figured out yet what will get you to where we need to get to. So when you were at Sandusky, everything that you're saying, I would say you do in your classroom. What do you think though is the reason that, and I think there are many reasons that we can have students get to the point where it's middle school, right? And something that is such a necessary skill as reading or necessary skill as writing. Why do you think we're getting to that point and they just haven't mastered that yet?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of different reasons. That's a loaded question, but
Yeah.
um at its core, okay, in reading, we have two sides of the reading rote. Basically,
Okay.
you have the code based side, which is like your decoding, encoding, and then you have your language based side. And one thing in my research in my current position that and throughout my doctoral work as well that I have found is basically our brains are hardwired for speech. So if you think back to when our ancestors would sit around fires and they would be able to acquire a language when it comes to speaking and listening. If we sat a kid in a room and we talked to them, they would be able to acquire the English language. It's the same way as you see our L students who come to the US and they really pick on very quick they catch on very quickly to the English language when it comes to speaking with their classmates and talking with their teachers. However, our brains are not hardwired for print or writing.
Gotcha.
So that code-based side, that decoding and encoding, one really big difficulty for our students is that for the longest time, we have not been teaching in elementary schools explicitly and systematically. So what I mean by that is you have some kids that can come into elementary school and they have wonderful language comprehension. So they have parents that read at home to them that really felt like literacy was a big deal. And even sometimes, even if their environment is not literate rich, then they can still catch on because they just
Yeah.
have skills and our brains are hardwired for it. Whereas the code based side, we're not. So then some students, if they come in and they already are going to have difficulties on that side of their brain, then what happens is sometimes their language side will compensate for that and they can still learn. There are some kids who, even if they are not taught explicitly and systematically that code based side, that they'll be okay and they'll effectively be able to read. And a lot of that also is supported at home. But then there are other kids who maybe they are supported well at home. They have literate parents who help support them, get them tutoring. Sometimes, even those students, it's difficult for them if they're not taught that code based side explicitly and systematically. And then, if you take into account socioeconomic status, the barriers just stack and stack and stack. So, what we have right now is we are seeing in middle school the after effects of so many years of not teaching kids the correct way, that code based side. And then if you add in all the other different factors that a student could have, then it just makes it more and more difficult. So that's what me and you saw a lot of the times is students who have so many things put up against them. And then on top of that, they were not taught the code based side explicitly and systematically. A lot of whole language and guided reading really contributed to a lot of the things that we were seeing in middle school.
We're gonna ask you this question. So a lot of times I would see a student who I may say to myself they could not read, and now looking back on it, I'm just like I had no research backing on anything that I would say in my own mind. But I could tell that they were struggling reading, but then they would pick up something that they were interested in. And then kind of all of a sudden it seemed like it was like, wow, they like understand what it's saying. They could tell it back to me. Like, where does that fall in the place? Like, how can you tell that a student really is like, hey, it just doesn't matter what I put in front of them, like they are struggling with this?
Yeah, when I was in Colonial Heights, I actually had a student who was one of those ones that had so many life barriers and then on top of that education barriers too, and he was functionally probably working at about a pre-K level when you would
Wow.
sit anything in front of him and he could talk to you all day because again he had good language comprehension, and kind of what you're talking about too is that prior knowledge, right? So
Mhm.
that's one of the things
Gotcha.
on the side of language comprehension is prior knowledge about a topic. If you sat a baseball passage in front of me, I don't know anything about baseball. So if you sat a baseball passage in front of me, there's going to be words in it, vocabulary words or references that I have to infer that I'm not going to understand because of my limited knowledge of baseball. But that kid who we gave them that passage or they read a book that they were really interested in the topic, they have all this prior knowledge. They have the vocabulary,
Gotcha.
the advanced vocabulary, and they can infer things that they normally can't because they have such rich content knowledge about that topic. But then there are some kids that may have, like the one I'm talking about, we'll call him Joe at this school division. He, like, even if you sat, I did some decoding inventories with him, and like he didn't know any long vowel sounds. So then when it came to looking at the paper, I mean, we couldn't even get to the point where we were matching sounds with letters. So then even if he has a lot of prior knowledge about a topic, he still can't access it.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
those those students are the ones that are critically behind. So you kind of have like a mixed bag, and we did too. So I had kids in my class at Sandusky that did have decoding needs, but they could still get through a text that they had some prior knowledge about. But then you do have in schools some kids, and we had a couple in Sandusky too that I was working with that have such advanced decoding difficulties that then they can't even, make sense of any
Mhm.
passage because it would be like us looking at a passage and somebody covering up 95% of the words in the passage for us. We're just not going to be able to glean anything from it.
So best case scenario, like what should this look like from elementary to middle to high school? Like, hey, if we're in elementary, this is what we should be doing, and this is where a student should be by the time they get here. And then from there, like, what does that look like? Because I don't think I've ever been at a point where I'm like, I know what a student is supposed to be able to do at this particular, and that's maybe the bad part of having the test, the SOL test at the end of the year. In my mind as a school leader, I just know, hey, can they do whatever that the targets are at the end of the year? But I don't know technically where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. In a perfect world, the SOL is really supposed to be like our bottom bar, right? And it's not even really a great indicator of reading comprehension because it asks the student so many more things. I know you've seen those passages on there before that are
Mhm.
about topics that they're not interested in, they've never seen before, they don't know. So we'll get into later why it's so important for content teachers in middle school to be a part of this too. We can't just, and I feel like we've done that a lot of times where we focus so much on reading and math because
Mhm.
of state accreditation and that we forget about science and social studies. But that's hurting us in the literacy because all of these high stakes achievement tests are also knowledge tests.
Yeah.
Because just like when I was talking about earlier, that a passage, when you infer, which that inferring is one of the hardest things for our kids to do when it comes to the SOL. And that's because it's asking them about content knowledge that a lot of times they don't have because we've
Mhm.
sacrificed content for literacy. So, but to go back to your question, the SOL is really meant to be like a bottom bar of like everybody should be okay with that. It should be easy. It should be everybody should be able to take that and say, okay, checked that box off. I'm at my minimum level of knowledge, and then we should be pushing students much further past that. Unfortunately, though, because of everything that's happened, that's not where we are right now.
Mhm.
One thing that we're trying to do with the Virginia Literacy Act is kind of like bridge that. And so, obviously, right now, elementary schools have core programs that have been researched and really vetted to say, are they giving both the literacy skills, not just SOL, but literacy skills so that they can be fine on the SOL? And then, because if kids can read, they can pass the SOL.
Yeah.
And then will start to see that after effect in middle school. The core programs are also all knowledge building. So they'll help support the kids in their literacy achievement, but also in taking that knowledge from K and then adding on to my content knowledge of science, math, worldly topics from next grade to next grade to next grade. So they build on that knowledge so that by the time they get to us in middle school, we're just adding on and deepening that knowledge of literacy, but also of content as well. And so that's really what I hope in a perfect world that we start to see. Because right now, what's so difficult for middle school is we're having to try and fill all those gaps and pull them up while simultaneously still teaching our content, our SOLs. And you guys, we don't have the time to do that.
Dude, this is crazy to me because like I feel like I'm taking in it. It's not bad, but as a school leader to just not know all of this, like you know what I'm saying. So it's good to have people in your building who do, but I'm sitting here like it makes me go into my building come Monday a little differently now too, looking at different students and being like, there's so much that goes into just helping a student be able to decode, be able to read. And obviously, decoding is a part of that. Like, and so a question I wanted to ask too is, can you break down? Because sometimes I think I'm using words interchangeably, and they're not. Like, what is literacy? Like, what is that?
Yeah. So do you mean like what are all the skills?
Like yeah, because I sometimes okay, so I will sometimes say literacy, and I think literacy is just reading and writing, and so that's the two things, and then I can't break it down from there. I don't even know if I'm literacy is just reading and writing. You know what I'm saying? So like, what is the like almost like what's the umbrella and breaking it down to the cells?
Yeah. I mean, definitely literacy is heavily involved with reading and writing, but you also have disciplinary literacy too. So, literacy in broad terms can really be how we read, write, speak, think about any given topic.
Mm.
So, our content teachers really have a big stake in this too, because I'm sure you've heard ever since the science SOL changed, our science teachers are, screaming at the top of their lungs, I need help. This is a reading test now. And my kids can't think critically. It's really a lot of the SOLs are starting to move into asking our students to critically think, which is really important for them even outside of school. So I personally believe that literacy is so important. And within reading and writing, you kind of have all of these various skills that are really working together to lead a student to be able to comprehend effectively. And so, really, reading comprehension is that end goal, and it's really more of a process than a product. I feel like we, as English people, always thought like, reading comprehension end goal, this is the assessment, the SOL is a product. But really, reading comprehension is a process. We're constantly building our ability to read adequately and have reading comprehension, and it's really a reciprocal process with the person who's reading and the text itself. So reading comprehension is actually much more difficult than I feel like we've ever given thought to in middle school. And then in addition, all of those other skills, like when we say decoding, encoding, there's a bunch of little teeny tiny skills that make up the ability to do that. So it really builds on itself all the way from letter sound correspondences in phonics and phonological awareness, and then building on that. And you have to have all of those skills in order to be able to read efficiently. Um,
Okay.
and then that leads us to reading comprehension, but we're always building that. So, like, I'm sure you've read books before in college, and if you went back and read those now, you would have a different understanding, a different comprehension of it because of all of your experiences that you've had since then. So it's similar for students too, in that we have to continually build that process for them instead of just saying, here's a worksheet, here's a text, we're going to do X, Y, and Z today because it's on the SOL and then move on, because we're really just shortchanging them when it comes to
Yeah.
what reading comprehension actually is.
So, I'm asking so many questions. I feel like I'm just learning right now. So it seems like then what, and I think you alluded to it a little bit. What has, I'm trying to say this the right way, because with all the knowledge that we have with reading right now, and literacy. Was it just that, like, I feel like as I grew up, I went through phonics, right? Like, I remember them going through the letters, learning the sounds of words, breaking up words, going through it. And I remember reading all the time. Like, I was like, everything was, there was a book, and which actually helped my love of reading. Like, I just enjoyed it. And I also read, I read comic books. Like, I still read comic books. I will pick up a graphic novel in a heartbeat. And it seems like in my mind, everybody could read. But I remember coming into my it was middle school. And I remember I went to a private school, it was at my church. I came in, I just assumed everybody could read, sat down, we opened up a book. And I remember I had a student beside me. He started reading. And I mean, he was like one word at a time. And I'm sitting in class. I remember I just read the passage. I just sat there and read it by myself, and it was just kind of sitting in class. Like, has reading gotten better over time or worse over time? Because it seems like there's always this theory that, man, people were reading so much better back then, and now we can't read now. And it's like, I don't know if that's true. I think
Yeah.
this has always been a thing.
Yeah, it's been a trend in a negative direction for a really long time, and we've kind of had this research for over 30 years about really
Wow.
it's everything that I'm talking about is a convergence of many different fields: psychology, neuroscience, and education to cognitive science. So they've literally done brain scans and figured out like what is going on in your brain when you're learning to read, when you are reading. However, we know that, and I'm gonna be real, in education, people do things that they think are right. And then when
Mm,
they're confronted with this idea of like, maybe you did something wrong that could have hurt kids, and like don't get me wrong, I have too. I've
mm,
done things before that I in all intentions thought was the correct thing, and then now looking back I'm like, oh, those poor first year kids that I taught. Like if I could go back in time I would completely do it over. And um I think that when people are confronted with that, there's this like ugly fear of there's no way that I could have done that wrong, because that means that I did something to somebody's child that could
mm,
affect their life. And instead of saying, okay, when we know better, we do better, and going along with the research and saying, okay, now we know this thing, like science, educational science is always evolving, then some people revert back and say, well, I learned that way, I was fine. Or I taught a group of
yeah,
kindergartners that way, and 50 of them were fine. But what about the other 30 that you taught that now can't read?
yeah,
The other thing too that I think just socially that we're noticing more and more now, because you said, like I didn't even know, and like we felt like everybody could read back then. Even my parents talk about that. They're like, everybody could read back when I was going to school.
right.
I actually think, and this is not like a well-researched thing for me, this is just my opinion, that because of where we are in today's world in terms of everything's on social media, like you have
Mm,
such a better or like wide net in what you're seeing and what you're noticing, that now it's just more widely known that this is a problem
yeah,
because of social media, but also because in today's world, you really can't get through the world being illiterate. Back
right.
when my parents were growing up, you could go be a mechanic, or you
Mm,
could work a job, and you could kind of like, they knew people that then they became adults and they found out like, so and so is illiterate. Like they actually can't read or write. But they could get along in the world and hold a job and be okay because they had good language skills. So they could speak, they could
right.
talk well, they could get along with people, and they knew how to do their job in the context of that. And they would find other ways to get around this barrier of reading and writing. However, nowadays, with technology and the involvement of technology, you can't do that anymore. Even
Yeah,
mechanics have to write reports. All of those jobs that we used to send kids to in HVAC and everything, they're having to really read and write now in a completely different way than what we teach. But that's why it's really important to think about disciplinary literacy, even in terms of some of our other programs when we get into high school, and think about what does authentic reading and writing look like for some of the jobs that our students are going to go into in those fields.
that I'm writing down the question because I'm like, "Ooh, that was so good. I have a question I want to ask." Dealing with that, what are some of the things you feel like are the things that we've done that are in the classroom that, hey, this really isn't good for kid? I don't know if you have like an example of like, hey, you know what? We've done this a lot because I've fallen prey to that as a teacher, where it's like, hey, this is what I was the way I was taught how to do something. I was a social studies teacher, so everyone knows too. SOL is standards of learning. So at Virginia, that is our test. And so I agree with you. I look back on some things I did when I first got in, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was the worst. I wouldn't want someone to do that with my kids. And I did that with multiple people's kids. What are some things that you feel like that are like, hey, this really doesn't help kids?
Yeah. In elementary, we know, and I was not an elementary teacher, so these are not things that I personally have like experience having done, but just from the research that we do and things that we're seeing in the field and our current experience, guided reading is not effective. So,
Mm.
sitting kids in a circle and reading to them, and not specifically giving them like this is the decoding feature that we're going to work on, and then that should be connected to the reading that they're doing, and that should be connected to the writing that they're doing. Like, that's what I mean when I say explicit and systematic, that it builds over the progression of the lesson, and that everything makes sense in context of like, you're not going to ask a kid to read a passage for a feature in reading that they haven't learned yet. So like if we're doing long vowels in our word work, then long vowels is going to be in the passage that I ask you to read today, because now you
Gotcha.
can, and you have to practice that over and over again. It's not like somebody could teach me a pattern in Spanish today and then have me read a short little passage and I'm going to get it every single time. Like we have to continually practice that. In middle school, a specific example of something that I have personally done is popcorn reading.
So
And
what's that?
so popcorn reading is when you randomly go around the room and you like popping popcorn and you say, okay, Mason, it's your turn to read, and you have to read aloud to the
Gotcha.
class. And then you pick on the next kid and you say, okay, it's your turn to read. And sometimes as teachers, we would do it as a way of like, this kid's not paying attention, and I know he's
Mhm.
not paying attention, so I'm going to call on him. But exactly what you said earlier of like that reduced fluency of the line by line reading, that the comprehension for the entire class is now at risk because it's so laborious
Wow.
that now none of us understand what you just read.
So it's almost like, and let me know if I'm wrong. So because I picked on a student who may be struggling with reading, in effect, I could actually be hurting the whole room because nobody's getting better at
Yeah.
this point.
And when I think about students too, our students in middle school, they have this awareness and they have for a long time. In elementary, the kids, they go to the intervention room and sometimes they think it's kind of fun, right? Like, especially
Mhm.
early elementary, they're like, I get to go with this fun teacher that I really like. Of course, that's a generalization. That's not the experience of every student. But in middle school in particular, we're coming up against motivation and engagement.
Yeah.
No.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, they have this societal awareness of now my classmates know that I'm not a good reader, or I don't want them to know that I'm a good reader. And if you think about it, they're faced with that every single day and every single
Yeah.
class. It's not just the ELA class. A lot of times when I would have outbursts of kids, it's because my class was at the end of the day and they knew without a shadow of a doubt that we were going to read or write. And they've been doing that all day long. And think about how exhausting that would be if all day long you have this difficulty that you're trying to hide from everybody, sometimes including your teacher. And then you get to the end of the day and you know there's this one specific class where you're going to have to do it. 1,000% for some of our kids, especially some of our boys, it's way easier for me to flip a desk and cuss my teacher out and be able to leave and leave that environment than it is to sit in that class and be made fun of because I can't do this thing that's so difficult for me.
So I think I said you just hit on something that, and we saw this like regularly, but I didn't even think about it as deep as you did. Like I always thought of the English class, but you're right. Like if all day long I am trying to hide or I just don't want to do. Like it's just human nature. I'm gonna try to figure out a way to get out of this. And I would rather just get in trouble and leave than be embarrassed. And like even saying it out loud is like why as an adult don't I understand that? Like, cause I do that. I would rather leave somewhere. It's just that I have the ability to, right? I don't want to be somewhere. I get in my car and I leave, right? The student can't. So they're going to figure out a way, whether that's I just got to go to the bathroom like 5 times during class. I'm going to do something to get out of it. Like, it's crazy to me why like that doesn't click for me as an adult that, hey, why don't you just take a little bit of time to figure out what's going on with the student, and now let's figure out how to support them. How did you do that? Because I I was an observer of you doing that regularly in class. Like, what did you do? How did you work through that?
Yeah. So you mean like if I saw that happen, what would I do?
Yes. Yes.
So
Sorry about that. Yep.
I'm not saying that I have like the best answer for this, but I'm going to tell you what I actually did do is I would actually not allow that kid, unless it was something like really bad, like you're not getting out of my class.
Okay.
Like I see you, I know what you're doing. And I would step into the hall with them. I'd have a conversation. At this point in time, and all of the things I'm talking about, there was always already an established relationship here, right? So a lot of times they're showing off in front of the classroom because and at this point in time, I wasn't doing popcorn reading. I just want to preface it
Mhm.
with that just acerbated things when
Yeah.
you're asking people to read. And so it was a lot of times when we would go from the IU to the we do, and then now it's your turn and you have to do it by yourself. And I could like see this like internal panic. And then
Mhm.
like weird things just started happening. It would be like I'm gonna tap on my neighbor and bother them, and then I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do that. And I could just like see it escalating. And so I would just say, like, so and so go stand in the hallway for a sec. I'll be there in a sec. You're good. You're good. Like, you're not in trouble. I just want to have a little chat. And so they'd like, roll their eyes and be like, oh my gosh, I can't stand this class. And then they go stand in the hallway. And then of course, as soon as I got out, they're kind of like they're up here, right? They're like, why are you picking on me today? Like, why are you doing this? And I just be like, what is going on? Like, just level with me. Like, what is wrong? And they kind of like, go around and around and say nothing, nothing. Like, why are you picking on me? And then finally, all of a sudden, like, I feel like I'm just like really persistent and probably kind of
Yeah.
annoyed in that sense. Stubborn is the word, probably. Of finally, they would say, like, I can't do this. Like, like
Mhm.
something along those lines. And now they were never eloquently saying, like, I can't read and I really hate this feeling. It was just a lot of like, I don't like this. I feel like I can't do this. And then I would always say, like, what do you need? Like, do you need me to help you? Like,
Mhm.
all you need to do is ask for help. And I think another thing too that helped is I was always really big on the classroom environment. And I'm sure that you remember this. Like,
Mhm.
the upper headlights were never on. I swear
Yes.
somebody should study that. There were lamps. Like the environment was very calming and soothing. And I brought that over into the environment of how they treated each other. Like one
Mhm.
thing that I was big on is you are not making fun of somebody in this classroom. And I would like get on them like a mom
Mhm.
like
Yes.
you are not going to make fun of somebody in this classroom for not being able to do something. One thing that I feel like was in that sense kind of in our favor is a lot of them were also in the same spot.
Mhm.
So, like I would be able
Mhm.
to tell them like you're not the only person. Like you're in middle school, your whole world is you, right? Like
Yeah.
you're so involved in your own world in your own head. And so I would remind them like this is a really hard thing. And I would even tell them sometimes and explain to them like you're not hardwired in your brain to be able to do this. All of these skills, like this is hard stuff and you're doing a really good job of just trying. And so things like that. I'm not saying that that's all the right answer or that it always worked because it didn't. And then, of course, when that escalates, you have to follow the proper protocols for getting help from your admins. But I would say 90% of the time it did work. And I think just taking that time was something that they didn't see all the time. And so it kind of a lot of times caught them off guard. I would feel
Yeah.
like, what exactly is going on? And then, like, I'm here to help you. And then I would help them and provide that support. But obviously too, I had really high expectations of every single kid.
Gotcha.
I always told them, like, you can do this. You can do things that you think that you can't do, and really push them, and then celebrated them when they did achieve something in my classroom.
Gotcha. So switching gears a little bit, because I think we could stay on this a lot, and I will attest to that. Like SJ didn't let kids out of a room. Like if as an administrator I had to come and get a student, it was literally because something like happened. Like we had to, right. It wasn't because a student was like, "Hey, I'm disrupting class." It was more of a, yeah, we it's time to go. You know what I'm saying? But she kept those students in the room, whether they wanted to go or not. So I'm going to switch now to not even English teachers, but core teachers. So I was a social studies teacher. I think maybe we tried this in our building, or it was maybe another school I worked at where it was like, hey, during your kind of mascot block or whatever, you as the social studies teacher, you're going to do some English work during this time. And then, or reading. And then another day it was like, you're going to do math. And I was always frustrated as that teacher because it's like, I didn't go to school for math.
Yeah.
And I didn't go to school for reading, but you're asking me to, in some ways, teach this. I don't know what I'm doing. But from what you're saying, though, is these skills need to be continually encouraged and reinforced in all of the classes. How do we do that?
Yeah, I am a firm believer of exactly what you said, that like those little blocks that we do where we're like, okay, we're gonna drop everything and work on math. We're gonna drop everything and work on literacy. I can tell you right now, nobody wants me to teach math. Like nobody wants
Agree.
to teach math. And I know teachers
Agree.
like I don't want them to teach reading. So I don't think that those little 30-minute blocks of time where you're like, everybody's going to work on IXL and like the math teacher is now going to like be the person to help you. I don't think those are necessarily effective. What I think is far, and I know from research is far more effective, and what we're pushing schools to do is, instead of that, how can you make literacy and disciplinary literacy, and I'll explain what I mean by that, a natural part of your day as a history teacher, as a science teacher, even as a math teacher. So disciplinary literacy is really, how do we read, write, speak, and think about science, about history authentically? So if you think about a scientist or a historian, they're definitely reading and writing in their positions, right? And it's authentic to what they're doing. I'm not saying by any means that a history teacher or a science teacher needs to figure out how to teach reading or how to do my SOLs when I was in my standards of learning or my standards or my content. Not at all. What I'm saying is, as a history teacher, how can you teach students that reading is important in the context of history? So, one thing that I have noticed a ton since COVID is that our content teachers, so our history teachers, our science teachers, have really taken their content, the things that they need students to be able to learn, and they have effectively taken all that information, all the facts, and put it onto slide decks.
Yeah.
And then put those slide decks onto your learning management system. And there's two things that are happening. One, students are no longer reading a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times they're no longer reading primary sources that are authentic to the discipline. A lot of times we don't even have textbooks anymore in classrooms. And so, not saying that that's a huge problem, but I'm saying what's a problem is when we strip all of that information and we synthesize it for students, we're taking away that skill. And then not only are we taking away that literacy skill of being able to synthesize and critically think about multiple different sources in the context of history or in the context of science, but we're also stripping away some of the critical content that they're learning because we're funneling it down. And now it would be way harder for me to learn a bunch of random facts than to learn, what do these facts mean in the context
Right.
of this historical situation. So that's where we've made it harder for them on two fronts. On one, to be able to learn the information to be successful on that content teacher's SOL, but also, and in the knowledge that they need to learn to be successful post school too, because all of these, this information that we teach students is bigger than the SOL. But we know our teachers are concerned. They're saying, hey, I understand you want me to do all these things, but how am I supposed to do that when I have to get them to pass this SOL? And the
Right.
reality is they're making it harder for the kids because it's harder to learn disjointed facts than for you to actually teach them at a depth that's going to help them in both literacy and in understanding that content at a deeper level.
So, so as a school leader, and you've led division work, you've led school work, now you're doing obviously state, work. Like how do I as a leader make my school a place where literacy is valued and we're doing this the right way, right? Like what should I even be looking for once we're doing things the right way? What should I be even looking for the data to say that like, yep, you're doing that well and kids are actually learning?
Yeah. From a leadership perspective, I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to look at your school culture and you have to say how do I as a leader, like I always, the same thing that I was with students is the same way that I was with adults. Like I would figure out what is my way in with this group of adults, right? So what do they really care about? And then look at that. So like when I was in Colonial Heights, my teachers really cared, my content teachers really cared about the kids. And they really cared about like post school. Like they were really good about saying, okay, it's not just my job to get them to pass the SOL. It's not just my job to get them to have good grades and be successful in school. It's my job that when they leave school, even high school, that they are able to do okay in the world, right? In whatever
Mm,
job that they want to get. And I think a lot of teachers, that's really important to them. And so saying like, hey guys, here is the data. And some schools, the teachers really are not they don't do a good job responding to that data, right? Or
yeah.
like if your school is doing really well with 80% of your population, then that national data might not be as good for them. So maybe figure out a way to look at the data within the context of like what's important to your people. And then giving them practical ways, I think, and starting small builds a school culture of like literacy is important for all of us and for our students, and then they'll really buy into that a lot more and it'll be more important to them because they'll own it. I think too, when you put it to them in terms of like what I said of we're not asking you to write a 5 paragraph essay like our English teachers do. We're not asking you to do cause and effect SOL from English, right? When you put it in the context of like this is going to help your kids better learn your content and then they get some quick wins, then they start to really say like, oh, this is going to work. So some things that we've done before is we have used the same vocabulary protocols
Mm,
across
mhm.
the entire school. So even math is always the one where they're like, all this sounds great. And I do think this is important, but like we're not reading long texts in math,
Right.
right? So that's why I think vocabulary being the first place to start because everybody, even the art teacher, has vocabulary for their standards that they have to work in. And even math, the Virginia Department of Education really started stressing to our math teachers the importance of higher level vocabulary on the standards. So if every single teacher in your building can use the same process for how we introduce new vocabulary words, that is going to help them not only learn words that they need for that content area, which we know students struggle with. They can't remember all these different words, and a lot of times they don't know those content specific words. But it's also going to help them because our students that need the most support throughout the day in reading, their cognitive load is so much
Mm,
because they're having to remember all of these things and they're usually having difficulty in multiple different subjects. And then on top of that, they go to all these different teachers in middle school and you may introduce vocabulary in one way in history with a routine, or you may just say, hey, everybody copy this down from the book. And then they go to English and they have this process that's different they're having to remember. And then they go to science and they have a different process they have to remember. And then now
wow.
they're going to math and they have a different process they have to remember. So when we start to do that, not only do students start catching on and it goes quicker and quicker and quicker, and then the math teacher all of a sudden is being like, oh, when I talk about the vocabulary protocol, my kids get their notebooks out, they know exactly what to do. And now we don't have the excuse of, I don't have enough time.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Helps in a couple different ways. Um, and it's not just vocabulary. That's just my place where I'm like, this is the easiest place to start in a school building
Yeah.
as a leader. But any instructional routines that we can be the same across grade levels or across an entire school is going to help reduce that cognitive load, and students are going to start pulling that information from content to content, and it's really going to benefit them.
So, and this may be the last question because again, I think we can spend the whole time, spend a lot more time there, and I think you're doing a fabulous job of just enlightening and educating. How do you now, and I've thought about this a lot recently, how do I take literacy to the community, right? So that it's not just the building, but how can my kids go home? You're going home, you're getting it encouraged. You come in here, you're getting encouraged. So you see the exponential growth from that partnership.
Yeah. I think the homeschool connection is so important, and I think it's really important that we give our parents multiple opportunities to work with this. One thing when I was in Petersburg is we started moving to the science-based reading research, and our parents were asking questions like, what is my kid's level? And we're like, no, we're not doing that anymore. And they're like, what do you mean you're not doing it anymore? So sometimes you get this pushback from the parents. And I've heard a
Mm.
lot of that from elementary schools that we've worked with these new core programs. I think anytime that you can bring parents into your school and really explain to them in terms that they can understand, because we all use in education all of these education buzzwords, and they don't all
Yes.
know those. So anytime that you can make it make sense for them and say, this is why we're doing this, and then these are some little things that you could do at home, I think that makes all the difference in the world. But just saying, like, here is why we're doing this, really helps with that trust too between the school and the home community. And I think it's really important that we give multiple opportunities for parents to come into our school. I always did Title I events where we would invite
Mm.
every single family, and we would feed them, and then we would have games and activities. And I would just get to talk to parents and say, hey, this literacy thing is obviously what I love talking about. And this is some things that you could do at home with your parents. We've done like bookmarks and things where we send them home and they have just like one or two little things on them that are
Mm.
easy wins
I
for
like that.
to do at home with their kids. So just getting creative in the ways that you engage with your parents, I think, is really important for many things, but also for literacy.
All right, SJ. Look, we're gonna start winding down. I don't want to honestly, because again, I like learning. For those of you who are listening to, um, I wanna push you. If wherever you are in the world, hopefully you have an SJ that is somebody that you can reach out to who understands literacy, who understands how this can impact your building and the strategies. I think as a leader, that's what I'm always looking for, is I can look at the research and hear the research. What are the strategies? What can I take with me after we talked? And I feel like today she's provided a lot of that. So we're going to do a quick lightning round of questions. This is hopefully it'll make you smile, and let's see what your thoughts are on some things. So the first question is, what is a book for you that you feel like, hey, it could be multiple that you like, but this is the one. If I wanted to start with literacy, where would I go?
I think the most accessible book on literacy and kind of the history of the things that I've touched on today. It's not like a super researchy book or anything like that. It's one that a parent could pick up and really understand and be like, wow, what have we been doing? Is The Knowledge Gap by Natalie Wexler.
Okay, gotcha. All right, five dinner guests, dead or alive. It could be anybody you want. Who would you bring to your dinner table if you could?
Yes, I'm gonna pull up my list because I prepared this for you.
Oh, okay,
Give me one
I'm
second.
interested.
Okay, I've got quite a dinner list here. So,
Okay,
um, Maya Angelou,
okay.
Glenn
Her name
Close.
has come up a lot. In my
Really?
yeah, she almost I got us out of the maybe eight interviews I've done. She's might have come up maybe four or five times.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Langston Hughes,
Mhm.
Nancy Hennessy. She is a researcher on comprehension. Um,
Okay.
This is an interesting one that I feel like nobody has probably ever said to you. Wilma Mankiller.
Oh,
She was actually one of the first women ever to lead the Cherokee Nation. So I would
wow.
talk
Okay.
about leadership and she was super into education and culture too. And then last but certainly not least, I would also invite Nelson Mandela.
That table right there, I think that I would love to be at that table. I feel like the knowledge and
Yes,
the, oh,
wisdom.
yeah, yes, that would be crazy. The last question is, who would you like to see on the podcast? But it has to be somebody that you could help us get if we were able to reach out and get to them.
Yes. So Cindy Williams is
Mm,
my top pick. She is one of the best instructional leaders that I have ever met in my entire life. And she was my mentor for the past 4 years. And pretty much everything that I know about leadership, I can attribute a
yeah,
lot of it to her. And especially like when you talk about systems and changing adult mindsets. She is currently the chief instructional officer and school leadership change director
yeah,
in Roanoke City.
okay,
And so we're still super close. I literally talked to her this past week about some things that she has going on in her schools. So I would love to connect you because she would be an absolute gem to talk to specifically about leadership in changing cultures and like how do you lead change in a systemic way.
oh, I love it. I appreciate you for that. And I was thinking about this too, right as you were talking. This is going to be totally out of protocol. A question I had: ChatGPT and AI.
Yeah.
How does that impact literacy? And then we'll be done, everybody. But
Yeah.
I definitely want to pick your brain on that.
So, I think that obviously in terms of research, it's going to take a while for us to know like how has it impacted in that way. But I can tell you too, I think there's some really important things to be thought about AI. I think that you can really use it as a tool. When I was actually working in Colonial Heights as division leader in literacy. That's like when ChatGPT first came out. And of course, all
Mm,
my high school teachers were like freaking out. They were like, SJ, what are we going to do? Kids are going to be able to plagiarize and we're never going to be able to know. Like, it doesn't work with plagiarism checkers. What are we going to do? And so I think when it comes to like practically for teachers, knowing your students' writing, like I can look at any students writing on day one of class. And then if they on even week three, pull some stuff off ChatGPT, like you're going to be able to tell. I think
yeah,
too, if teachers really get in and start using it, you can start to see, I even see sometimes on social media, people will just copy and paste and you can tell when it's
yeah,
ChatGPT because it's the language structure, right? So in terms of like plagiarism, if you just get in there and you play with it and you know about it, I think it's really important to teach our students how to use these tools though, because I don't think they're going anywhere. So I think it's a matter of seeing how can we use this as a tool for our students and teach them that this is digital literacy, right?
yeah.
Like how do we use this in a way that's going to benefit the student, but not just have them using it as a way to kind of like not do their work on their own.
Gotcha. No, I appreciate that because I think definitely our listeners, that would be a question that they have. So, everybody, appreciate you again. This is Hot Conversations. We're being honest, open, and transparent. I think you've got a wealth of knowledge. But again, I hope you have an SJ with you that is able to lead you through. As the leaders, please know you don't have to go through this on your own. So, don't try to fix it on your own. Find individuals who know what they're doing and they can help you with this. So, we love you. Keep leading, and we'll talk to you later.